Marcus Reeve's fingers lost their grip on the corroded drainage pipe just as the stolen nutrient bars tumbled from his makeshift satchel, scattering across the academy's pristine courtyard like breadcrumbs marking his descent from grace. The fall lasted 3 heartbeats, long enough for him to glimpse the shock in the eyes of the uniformed cadets below, long enough to smell the ozone from their training weapons mixing with his own fierce sweat, long enough to realize that 18 years of surviving the slums had prepared him for many things, but not for crash landing in the middle of Kethvar Military Academy's most elite tactical exercise. His shoulder struck the manicured grass with a wet thud that sent shockwaves through his ribcage. Pain flared white-hot down his spine as he rolled, instinctively curling into a defensive position learned from countless beatings in the Undercity. The world spun in kaleidoscope fragments, polished boots, bewildered alien faces, the imposing walls of the academy that had loomed over his ramshackle neighborhood like a fortress of impossible dreams. Get up, move, survive. The commands fired through his nervous system before conscious thought caught up. Marcus pushed himself to his knees, tasting copper blood from where he'd bitten his tongue. His ragged clothes, a patchwork of scavenged fabric and determination, stood out like a wound against the pristine uniforms surrounding him. 20 meters away, a group of cadets huddled behind an improvised barricade, their training exercise forgotten as they stared at this unwelcome intruder. These weren't the golden children of noble houses or wealthy merchant families. Marcus recognized the hunger in their eyes, the slight desperation that marked academy rejects and charity cases. The underdogs. A threnny female with scales that gleamed like burnished copper stepped forward, her weapon lowered but ready. Vorlash, according to the name tape on her uniform. Her vertical pupils tracked Marcus with predatory focus, but something in her posture suggested curiosity rather than hostility. "You're not supposed to be here, human." Her voice carried the distinctive harmonic undertones of her species, each word layered with frequencies that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Marcus had heard threnny voices before, usually shouting at him to move along from wherever he tried to find shelter. Marcus wiped blood from his split lip, his mind already cataloging the tactical situation with the same survival instincts that had kept him alive in streets where alien gangs treated humans like disposable currency. 5 cadets, standard academy training weapons set to medium stun. 1 heavy repeater mounted on their barricade, but poorly positioned, dead ground to the left where an attacker could advance unseen. Professional soldiers would have never made such an elementary mistake. "Neither am I supposed to be hungry," Marcus said, pushing himself to his feet with deliberate slowness. Yet here we are. The training scenario around them continued its relentless countdown. Red warning lights strobed from tactical displays mounted on nearby trees, and Marcus could hear the mechanical whir of training drones repositioning themselves for the next phase of the exercise. Whatever test these cadets were failing, time was running out. A tall equerry male with skin like polished obsidian gestured toward the scattered nutrient bars. Cohen, his name tape read. His gills fluttered with what Marcus recognized as barely contained panic. 3 minutes until the assault drones activate, he said, his voice carrying the liquid consonants of his species. "We can't hold this position. Command marked us as eliminated 2 phases ago." Marcus's eyes swept the training ground with newfound interest. The tactical display on the nearest tree showed red enemy positions advancing from 3 sides, their virtual opponents closing the net with mathematical precision. These underdogs had been written off, left to fail publicly, while the academy's elite students claimed victory elsewhere. But Marcus saw something else entirely. The terrain sloped just enough to create a blind spot. The timing of drone movements followed predictable patterns. Most importantly, the enemy's advance assumed rational behavior from cornered prey. They never expected anyone to attack. Marcus snatched up one of the fallen nutrient bars and bit into it without ceremony, the synthetic proteins tasting like cardboard and desperation. His mind raced through possibilities, calculating angles and timing with the same ruthless efficiency he'd once used to plan food thefts. "You're thinking too small," he said, crumbs falling from his lips as he spoke. This isn't about holding ground. It's about rewriting the rules. Vorlash's head tilted with reptilian curiosity. Her weapon remained ready, but Marcus caught the flash of something dangerous in her eyes. Hope, maybe, or recognition of a fellow predator. What are you suggesting, thief? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since falling from the academy roof, he felt the familiar rush of a plan coming together. In the slums, he'd learned that desperation could be transformed into opportunity if you were willing to think beyond conventional wisdom. I'm suggesting we win. The assault drones would expect retreating targets. They'd sweep the obvious escape routes while tightening their net around the barricade. But if Marcus's calculations were correct, and his life had depended on such calculations more times than he could count, there was a window. 30 seconds of chaos. That's all they needed. Marcus grabbed Vorlash's arm, feeling the surprising warmth of her scales beneath the uniform fabric. Her muscles tensed like coiled springs, ready for action. When I move, follow me exactly. Don't think, don't hesitate. Trust that I've mapped every possible angle of this nightmare. He turned to the others, Cohen with his nervous gills, a young Cathara female named Senna whose feathers were dull with stress, and Thylex, a scarred veteran repeater whose six-limbed frame suggested countless battles. The timer reached 60 seconds. Marcus closed his eyes and let his mind map the battlefield in 3 dimensions: drone flight patterns, terrain features, weapon ranges. Variables collapsed into certainties, chaos resolved into elegant simplicity. This was what he'd been born for. Not the stealing, not the running, not the endless struggle against a system designed to crush people like him. This moment when complexity bowed to intelligence, when survival demanded not just cunning but genius. 45 seconds. Now. Marcus vaulted over their barricade and sprinted directly toward the heaviest concentration of enemy drones. Behind him, he heard Vorlash's sharp intake of breath, then the sound of boots on grass as the others followed. Training weapons whined to life as they laid down covering fire according to his shouted instructions. The drones reacted exactly as predicted. They pivoted to intercept this inexplicable charge, their targeting algorithms confused by prey that refused to behave like prey. For 17 seconds, the machine's attention focused entirely on Marcus and his team. 17 seconds, long enough for Marcus to reach the drainage culvert he'd spotted from above, long enough to implement the most audacious flanking maneuver in Academy history, long enough to prove that sometimes the best defense was an offense so unexpected it redefined the battle entirely. The simulation ended with 5 Academy rejects standing victorious over a field of deactivated drones, their weapons smoking and their faces flushed with disbelief. In the observation tower overlooking the training ground, Academy Director Chen lowered his field glasses with slow deliberation. His weathered face showed nothing, but Marcus caught the slight tightening around his eyes that suggested wheels turning behind careful composure. The same Marcus Reeve who'd been stealing food not 5 minutes ago now stood at attention, while uniformed instructors downloaded telemetry data and muttered among themselves in voices too low to overhear. Cadet Vorlash stepped up beside him, her reptilian features arranged in what he was learning to recognize as her version of a grin. "For a thief," she said quietly, "you fight like you understand war." Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead, leaving a streak of mud across his pale skin. Around them, other training groups were completing their exercises with varying degrees of success, but none had achieved what 5 discarded cadets had just accomplished under the leadership of a homeless human. Maybe because I've been fighting one my whole life. The Academy's elite students began filtering back from their own exercises, their perfect uniforms, and confident, bearing a sharp contrast to Marcus's motley team. He caught glimpses of barely concealed hostility in their expressions, the same look he'd seen from authority figures in the slums who resented having their assumptions challenged. Director Chen descended from the observation tower with measured steps, his boots clicking against polished stone. Behind him came a cluster of instructors whose species Marcus couldn't immediately identify, their alien features composed in expressions of professional interest, mixed with something that might have been concern. The director stopped directly in front of Marcus, studying him with the kind of intensity usually reserved for specimens under laboratory conditions. Your name, son, Marcus Reeve. Age, 18 standard. Previous military experience. Marcus almost laughed. Previous experience hiding from military police, maybe. Previous experience dodging academy security while trying to survive on scraps and stolen goods. None, sir. Director Chen nodded once, as if confirming some internal calculation. Around them, the training ground had fallen unnaturally quiet as other cadets paused their activities to watch this unprecedented interaction. In 37 years of running tactical exercises, I have never seen a more elegant solution to the Corvani scenario. The parameters were designed to be unsolvable using conventional academy doctrine. He paused, letting that information settle like dust on still water. Tell me, Cadet Reeve, how did you identify the drone coordination frequency? Marcus felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. Elite students who'd spent years studying theoretical tactics. Instructors who'd survived real battles. His fellow underdogs who were still processing their impossible victory. I didn't identify it, sir. I counted. Marcus nodded toward the deactivated drones scattered across the field like metallic confetti. Each drone checks in with the central coordinator every 2.3 seconds. During target acquisition, that interval drops to 1.7 seconds. When multiple drones lock onto the same target, they synchronize to prevent friendly fire incidents. He gestured toward the path his charge had taken, retracing the geometry of his desperate gambit. If you move fast enough and unpredictably enough, you can force a synchronization cascade. The drones waste processing power trying to coordinate instead of focusing on target elimination. Creates a 17-second window where their reaction time drops by 40%. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable. Marcus realized he'd just explained his reasoning to people who'd spent decades studying military theory, using terminology he'd absorbed through observation rather than formal education. Director Chen's expression remained carefully neutral, but Marcus caught the microscopic widening of his pupils that suggested surprise. And you calculated this spontaneously. Marcus shrugged, suddenly aware of how his tattered clothes and unwashed smell must appear to these polished professionals. It's just pattern recognition, sir. Same as knowing which merchants leave their stalls unguarded during shift change, or which patrol routes the security forces repeat. He caught himself before adding that survival had taught him to read systems the way others read books, to find the hidden weaknesses that kept predators fed and prey alive. Cadet Vorlash stepped forward with fluid grace, her scales catching the late afternoon light. Request permission to speak, sir. Director Chen nodded. Marcus Reeve led our unit to victory against impossible odds. His tactical assessment was flawless, his execution was precise, and his leadership inspired confidence under pressure. She paused, her vertical pupils fixed on the director with unwavering intensity. I recommend immediate admission to the Academy's tactical program. A ripple of whispers spread through the gathered cadets. Marcus caught fragments, amazement, resentment, disbelief that someone like him could earn such recognition. The same emotions he'd seen countless times when slum dwellers achieved anything beyond mere survival. Director Chen studied Marcus for another long moment, then made a gesture that brought silence back to the training ground. The Academy exists to identify and develop tactical excellence wherever it may be found. Natural ability, regardless of origin, serves the greater defense of our world. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a tone meant for Marcus alone. You'll be provided with quarters, uniforms, and full access to Academy resources. Your training begins tomorrow at 600. Don't make me regret this decision. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, not quite hope, but something closer to possibility than he'd experienced in years. Around him, his fellow underdogs beamed with vicarious pride, while elite students watched with expressions that promised future challenges. Thank you, sir. Director Chen nodded curtly and turned away, but Marcus caught his final words carried on the evening breeze. Thank the enemy forces who taught you to think like a survivor instead of a student. As the crowds dispersed, and evening shadows lengthened across the training ground, Marcus found himself alone with the 4 cadets who'd followed him into impossible victory. They stood in comfortable silence, each processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. Vorlesh broke the quiet first, her harmonic voice carrying undertones of satisfaction. Tomorrow, you begin learning what we've spent years studying. Think you can handle the academic pressure after mastering the practical application. Marcus smiled, remembering the countless hours he'd spent watching academy exercises from his hiding places in the surrounding buildings, studying their techniques not from curiosity but from necessity, learning their patterns because knowledge meant the difference between successful theft and painful capture. I've been studying this place longer than you might think. The months that followed blurred together in a kaleidoscope of intensive training, theoretical examination, and practical application. Marcus absorbed military doctrine with the same voracious hunger he'd once directed toward finding food, his mind cataloging every principle and storing every technique for future use. The written examinations came easily. Tactical theory, strategic planning, logistics coordination, concepts that others struggled to memorize, Marcus understood intuitively because he'd seen their applications in the brutal economics of survival. But it was the field exercises where he truly excelled. Every simulated battle became an opportunity to demonstrate that unconventional thinking could triumph over superior resources. Marcus led mixed teams of humans and aliens to victory after victory, his strategies consistently catching instructors by surprise with their elegance and audacity. Not everyone appreciated his success. The elite cadets, sons and daughters of wealthy families, who'd expected their academy experience to be a pleasant prelude to guaranteed leadership positions, watched Marcus's rise with growing resentment. Their hostility crystallized around Kethril, a Vorth noble whose family had donated significant resources to the academy. Kethril made his feelings known during a tactical evaluation in their 3rd month. Easy to seem brilliant when you ignore proper doctrine, he said, his 4 arms gesturing dismissively. Real warfare requires discipline, not desperate improvisation. Marcus finished plotting coordinates on his tactical display before responding. Around them, other cadets paused their work to listen, sensing the tension that had been building for weeks. Proper doctrine assumes your enemy follows the same rulebook, he said quietly. What happens when they don't? Kethril's upper arms crossed while his lower hands continued working at his display, a gesture of supreme confidence among his species. Professional soldiers adapt doctrine to circumstances. We don't abandon proven methods for theatrical stunts. The instruction chamber fell silent except for the hum of tactical computers and the soft breathing of 24 students. Marcus set down his stylus and turned to face his critic directly. During the Cathara border conflict, Admiral Thynus relied on proven methods. Textbook deployments, conventional formations, disciplined execution of standard tactical doctrine. He stepped closer, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. She lost 17 ships and 4,000 crew members because her enemy had studied the same textbooks and knew exactly how she would respond. Kethril's skin shifted to a deeper shade of blue, indicating rising anger among Vorth physiology. You're comparing yourself to Admiral Thynus. Marcus shook his head. I'm comparing myself to her enemy, the one who won. Before Kethril could respond, the chamber's main display activated with an incoming priority message. Director Chen's face appeared, his expression carrying the kind of gravity that made experienced soldiers check their weapons. All cadets report to Combat Operations Center immediately. This is not a drill. The walk through academy corridors felt different now, charged with electricity that made Marcus's survival instincts sing with warning signals. Other students moved with nervous energy, their conversations filled with speculation about potential threats. In the operations center, massive displays showed real-time tactical data from the planet's orbital defense network. Marcus read the information with growing understanding and growing dread. 47 enemy ships had dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Cathara raiders, according to the identification signals, but flying in coordinated formations that suggested military precision rather than typical pirate opportunism. Director Chen stood at the center of the organized chaos, his hands moving across tactical interfaces with practiced efficiency. The Cathara hegemony has announced their intention to claim this system under ancient territorial rights. Their demands include unconditional surrender and immediate evacuation of all non-Cathara populations. He paused, letting that information register among the assembled cadets. Our defensive fleet consists of 12 ships. We are outnumbered nearly 4-1. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. The same feeling he'd experienced watching security forces conduct sweeps through the slums. The recognition that powerful forces were in motion, and individual survival depended on reading the situation correctly. A senior instructor stepped forward, her aquari features composed in professional calm. Fleet Command has requested Academy Tactical Assessment. Our graduating class will provide advisory support to actual combat operations. Around Marcus, elite cadets straightened with visible pride. This was their moment, the validation of years spent studying theoretical combat. But Marcus noticed something else in the tactical displays, patterns that reminded him of lessons learned in darker circumstances. Director Chen activated a three-dimensional hologram showing the system's defensive layout. Federation ships clustered around strategic positions, while enemy forces advanced with methodical precision. Initial defense plans call for concentrated defensive formations around major population centers. We'll force them to attack fortified positions, while our orbital platforms provide supporting fire. Standard defensive doctrine. Logical, proven, predictable. Marcus raised his hand. The chamber fell silent. Elite cadets turned to stare at the human who dared interrupt senior officers during active combat planning. Director Chen nodded for him to speak. "Sir, request permission to propose alternative tactical assessment." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus could feel Kethral's hostile stare burning into his back, could sense the collective intake of breath from students who couldn't believe his audacity. "Proceed, Cadet Reeve." Marcus stepped toward the holographic display, his mind already mapping possibilities with the same clarity he'd once used to plan escape routes through hostile territory. The enemy formation suggests they've studied our defensive protocols. Their advance coordinates precisely with known positions of our orbital platforms and fleet concentrations. He gestured toward the tactical data, highlighting movement patterns that others had missed. "They're not planning to attack our positions, sir. They're planning to bypass them entirely." Director Chen leaned forward with sharp attention. "Explain." Marcus manipulated the hologram to show projected enemy movements based on current trajectories. "If I were commanding those ships, I wouldn't waste time fighting fortified positions. I'd use the bulk of my force to fix your attention on the outer defense perimeter, while smaller units slip through the gaps and hit your real targets." He highlighted civilian population centers that lay defenseless behind the main battle lines. "Force you to choose between maintaining defensive formations or breaking position to protect non-combatants. Either choice weakens your overall defensive posture." The silence stretched until Marcus could hear his own heartbeat echoing in his ears. Around him, instructors exchanged glances, while senior cadets processed implications they hadn't considered. Fleet Admiral Torres stepped out of a communications alcove, her face grim with fresh intelligence. Cadet Reeve's assessment matches new reconnaissance data. Enemy forces have detached 6 light cruisers from their main formation. Current trajectory suggests interdiction of civilian evacuation routes. Director Chen's hands moved across his tactical interface with rapid precision, updating defensive deployments based on Marcus's analysis. Recommendations, Cadet. Marcus felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Not just his own history of survival and struggle, but the collective history of everyone on this world who would live or die based on decisions made in the next few hours. "We need to abandon defensive doctrine entirely, sir. Make them react to us instead of the other way around." He manipulated the hologram to show a new deployment pattern. Ships scattered in seemingly random positions, but actually coordinated to create overlapping fields of fire. Let them commit to their initial attack plan. When they move to exploit what looks like defensive confusion, we collapse the net and eliminate their light cruisers before they can threaten civilian targets. Admiral Torres studied the proposed formation with professional intensity. High-risk strategy. If the timing is imperfect, we lose ships we can't afford to replace. Marcus nodded, remembering similar calculations made in alleyways where mistakes meant death, but success meant another day of life. The alternative is losing everything we're trying to protect, ma'am. Director Chen activated communication links to Fleet Command, his voice carrying clearly through the operations center. Fleet units implement revised defensive deployment. Authorization Chen Delta 7. The holographic display shifted as real ships moved to new positions, their crews trusting in calculations made by a former thief who'd learned warfare in the University of Survival. Over the next 4 hours, Marcus watched his theoretical knowledge become practical reality. The enemy responded exactly as predicted, their formations committing to attacks against positions that were no longer defended, while Federation forces waited in carefully prepared ambush positions. When the engagement finally ended, 34 enemy ships had been destroyed or disabled, while Federation losses remained minimal. The civilian evacuation proceeded without interference, and the Cathara hegemony withdrew their territorial claims in exchange for prisoner repatriation. In the quiet aftermath, as Academy staff processed casualty reports and strategic assessments, Director Chen approached Marcus with an expression of professional respect mixed with something that might have been amazement. Fleet Command has requested your permanent assignment to Strategic Planning Division. Full commission, immediate rank of lieutenant, and authorization to develop new tactical doctrine. Marcus felt the strange sensation of possibility becoming reality, of survival instincts transforming into something larger and more meaningful. Thank you, sir. Director Chen studied him for a moment longer, then smiled with genuine warmth. Thank you, Lieutenant Reeve, for reminding us that sometimes the best solutions come from thinking like our enemies instead of our textbooks. As evening settled over the academy grounds, Marcus found himself standing at the same observation point where he'd once planned desperate food thefts. Now he wore a proper uniform and carried legitimate authority. But the view remained the same: buildings full of people whose lives depended on decisions made by others. Vorlash joined him at the observation rail, her scales gleaming in the setting light. Strange how falling off a roof can change the trajectory of an entire war. Marcus smiled, thinking of all the rooftops he'd climbed and all the falls he'd survived. Each one had taught him something about balance, about timing, about finding opportunity in moments when others saw only disaster. Maybe that's what tactics really are, he said, learning to fall in the right direction. Below them, the academy continued its eternal mission of transforming civilians into soldiers, of teaching young minds to think in terms of strategy and sacrifice. But now Marcus understood that the most valuable lessons couldn't be found in textbooks or simulations. They were written in the experiences of those who'd learned to survive when survival itself required genius.